Imagine this. You wake up on a Tuesday morning, sunlight streaming through your bedroom window, the world outside bustling with purpose and ambition. Your alarm has been ringing for 7 minutes. Your phone buzzes with notifications, emails demanding responses, messages requiring acknowledgement, a calendar packed with obligations that once seemed meaningful. Yet something profound happens in this moment of transition between sleep and wakefulness. Your body, as if weighted by invisible chains, refuses to move, not from illness, not from exhaustion, but from something far deeper, far more mysterious. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, perhaps years, you feel completely honest with yourself. The thought creeps in like a whisper from your unconscious. I want to stay here forever, not just in bed, but in this liminal space between dreams and demands, between being and doing, between the person you've constructed and the one you've forgotten. But here's the paradox that will haunt you. This desire, which society labels as laziness, depression, or moral failing, might be the most intelligent response your psyche has ever produced. What if your urge to remain horizontal isn't a retreat from life, but the deepest form of rebellion against a world that has stolen your soul while you weren't looking? Consider this unsettling possibility that your bed has become a sanctuary not because you're broken, but because everything else is, that your horizontal position is vertical thinking, that your stillness is the most radical movement you can make in a culture addicted to motion without meaning. You see, there's something profoundly wrong with a civilization where lying down feels like transgression, where rest feels like rebellion, where the horizontal human is seen as horizontally moral. We've created a world where being busy has become a virtue, where exhaustion is worn like a badge of honor, where the question, what do you do, has replaced who are you? And in this world, your desire to remain lying down becomes an act of existential defiance. But what if this isn't a personal failing? What if this is your unconscious mind staging an intervention? What if every cell in your body is screaming a truth that your conscious mind refuses to hear? That you reliving someone else's life, chasing someone else's dreams, moving at someone else's pace toward someone else's definition of success? The great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung understood something that our hyperkinetic age has forgotten. He knew that symptoms aren't always sicknesses, sometimes they're solutions. Sometimes what we call pathology is actually the psyche's attempt at healing. Sometimes lying down isn't giving up. It's the first step toward standing up for who you really are. Think about it. When did you last lie down without guilt? When did you last experience horizontal time that moves sideways instead of forward? Time that deepens instead of progresses? Time that simply is instead of becoming? If you can't remember, then you've discovered something crucial. You've been colonized by vertical time, linear time, productive time. You've forgotten that there are other ways to exist. Your bed knows something your calendar doesn't. Your body understands what your schedule has forgotten. Your horizontal self holds wisdom that your vertical self has lost. And perhaps, just perhaps, your desire to stay lying down isn't a symptom of what's wrong with you, but a signal of what's wrong with the world you're trying so desperately to fit into. This is where our journey begins, with the recognition that your seemingly simple desire to remain lying down opens a door to the most profound questions about human existence. Who decided that motion equals progress? Who convinced you that busy equals worthy? Who taught you that horizontal equals lazy and vertical equals virtuous? And most importantly, what happens when you stop running long enough to ask why you started running in the first place? The answer lies buried in what Jung called the collective unconscious, that vast repository of shared human experiences and archetypal patterns that shape our behavior in ways we rarely comprehend. But to understand why you want to stay lying down, we must first understand what forces conspired to make you stand up and start running in the first place. Jung recognized something that our productivity-obsessed culture desperately wants to ignore: that modern civilization has created what he termed neurosis of the masses. We've constructed a world that demands constant motion, endless growth, perpetual optimization, a world fundamentally at odds with the natural rhythms of human consciousness. Your desire to remain horizontal isn't a personal dysfunction. It's a healthy response to a dysfunctional system. Consider the profound violence of the alarm clock. Every morning, this mechanical tyrant rips you from the depths of unconscious wisdom, from dreams that might contain crucial messages, from sleep cycles that follow ancient biological rhythms, from the profound restoration that happens only in horizontal stillness. The alarm clock is the perfect symbol of our vertical tyranny. It forces you upright before you're ready, launching you into someone else's schedule, someone else's priorities, someone else's definition of a day well lived. Friedrich Nietzsche, that prophet of psychological rebellion, understood this violence intimately. He wrote about the herd mentality, the way humans surrender their individual will to collective expectations. Your reluctance to leave your bed isn't weakness. It's your individual will asserting itself against the herd's demand for perpetual motion. It's your authentic self staging a quiet revolution against what Nietzsche called slave morality, the belief that your worth is determined by your usefulness to others. But there's something even deeper at work here. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism who profoundly influenced Jung's thinking, identified what he called the will to live, an unconscious driving force that compels all beings toward action and striving. Yet Schopenhauer also recognized that this will is fundamentally blind, leading us to chase desires that can never truly satisfy us. Your desire to stay lying down might be your unconscious recognition of this truth, that all this running and striving leads ultimately to nowhere meaningful. Jung expanded on this insight through his concept of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social expectations. Over time, we become so identified with our persona that we forget who we actually are underneath. Your professional identity, your social roles, your daily routines, these aren't you. They're costumes you've worn so long that you've forgotten you're wearing them. And your bed becomes the one place where the persona can be safely removed, where you can exist without performance, without purpose, without pretense. Think about the psychological architecture of lying down. Horizontal is the position of birth, of death, of love, of dreams, of truth. It's the position from which we first experienced safety in our mother's arms. It's the position we return to for healing, for rest, for the deepest forms of intimacy. Vertical living, standing, rushing, performing is learned behavior. Horizontal being is our original state. Yet somewhere in your development, you absorbed the toxic message that horizontal equals inferior. You internalized what Jung called collective complexes, unconscious patterns of thought and behavior that entire cultures share. The Protestant work ethic, the capitalist equation of time with money, the modern mythology that equates motion with progress, these aren't natural laws. They're collective neuroses that have colonized your individual psyche. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the way we flee from the anxiety of authentic existence by losing ourselves in roles and routines. Your daily vertical life might be the ultimate expression of bad faith, standing up not because you choose to, but because you've forgotten you have a choice. Your bed represents what Sartre called radical freedom, the terrifying and liberating recognition that you can choose how to exist. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Nazi concentration camps and founder of logotherapy, discovered something profound about human motivation. He realized that the primary human drive isn't pleasure or power, it's meaning. And perhaps your inability to leave your bed is your unconscious recognition that your vertical life has become meaningless. That all this standing and striving serves no purpose deeper than social compliance and economic participation. The hidden problem isn't that you want to stay lying down. The hidden problem is that you've forgotten why you ever agreed to stand up in the first place. You've been running so long that you've forgotten your destination. You've been climbing so determinedly that you've forgotten to ask whether this mountain is worth climbing. And now, lying in your bed, staring at the ceiling, you're finally still enough to hear what your unconscious has been trying to tell you all along, that this isn't living. This is performance. This isn't existence. This is compliance. This isn't your life. This is someone else's dream of what your life should be. But recognizing the problem is only the beginning, because now you must face an even more unsettling question. If standing up and running has become an unconscious habit, what other unconscious forces are shaping your existence? What other collective neuroses have you absorbed? What other forms of bad faith have you embraced? The rabbit hole goes deeper than you imagined. What you don't realize, lying there in your horizontal sanctuary, is that your rebellion against vertical living has already begun rewiring your brain in ways that neuroscience is only beginning to understand. Your choice to remain still in a world obsessed with motion isn't just psychological resistance, it's neurological revolution. Consider what happens in your brain when you finally stop running. The default mode network, a collection of brain regions most active during rest, suddenly springs to life. This network, which includes the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, is responsible for self-referential thinking, moral decision-making, and constructing your sense of identity. When you're constantly busy, constantly vertical, constantly performing, this crucial network gets suppressed. You literally lose access to your authentic self. But here's where the consequences become truly unsettling. While you've been standing up and showing up, while you've been producing and performing, a massive psychological theft has been taking place. Your attention, that most precious resource, your connection to present moment awareness, has been systematically harvested and sold. Social media algorithms exploit what psychologists call intermittent variable reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Your vertical life has become a slot machine, and you're the product being consumed. Jung warned about this long before smartphones existed. He spoke of psychic inflation, the way modern humans become possessed by external forces, losing connection to their inner center. Your inability to leave your bed isn't depression. It's your psyche's desperate attempt to deflate, to return to center, to reclaim what has been stolen. The unseen consequence extends far beyond your individual experience. Your horizontal rebellion is part of what sociologists call lying flat movements emerging across cultures. From China, this Tang Ping, to Japan, this hikikomori phenomenon. Millions of people, particularly young adults, are unconsciously staging the same revolt, choosing horizontal existence over vertical exploitation. This isn't coincidence. This is collective unconscious resistance to a system that has become fundamentally inhuman. But the most disturbing consequence lies in what psychologists term learned helplessness. Accept it as operating in reverse. You haven't learned to be helpless. You've learned to be helpful to everyone except yourself. You've become so skilled at meeting external demands that you've lost the ability to recognize your own needs. Your bed becomes the only place where your authentic desires can surface, where you can hear the whispered protests of your neglected soul. The cognitive bias called system justification theory explains why this feels so wrong to you. Humans have a psychological tendency to defend and rationalize the status quo, even when it's harming them. Your guilt about wanting to stay lying down isn't moral intuition. It is your mind defending a system that profits from your vertical compliance. You've been programmed to feel guilty about rest, ashamed of stillness, anxious about non-productivity. Meanwhile, your nervous system tells a different story. Chronic vertical living triggers what is called allostatic load, the wear and tear on your body from constantly adapting to stress. Your adrenal glands, designed for occasional bursts of activity followed by recovery, remain in a state of perpetual activation. Your cortisol levels mirror those of trauma survivors. Your sleep cycles fragment. Your immune system weakens. Your body is literally breaking down from vertical toxicity. Jung understood this through his concept of enantiodromia, the principle that psychological extremes inevitably flip into their opposites. Your extreme verticality has created an equally extreme need for horizontality. This isn't pathology. It's psychic self-regulation. Your unconscious is trying to restore balance to a life that has become dangerously imbalanced. The most insidious consequence is what happens to your capacity for deep thinking. Vertical living demands quick decisions, rapid responses, immediate reactions. But the kind of thinking that leads to wisdom, creativity, and authentic choice requires what psychologists call cognitive space, the mental equivalent of lying down. When you're constantly upright, constantly moving, you lose access to the slow, meandering, horizontal thoughts that contain your deepest insights. Cultural conditioning has convinced you that this horizontal thinking is lazy thinking. But neuroscience reveals the opposite. The most complex cognitive processes, pattern recognition, creative synthesis, moral reasoning occur during states of relaxed attention. Your bed isn't where thinking stops. It's where thinking finally becomes possible. The societal consequence extends into what sociologist Zygmunt Bauman called liquid modernity, a world where everything solid melts into air, where traditions dissolve, where identity becomes fluid and uncertain. In such a world, lying down becomes a radical act of solidity, of refusing to be liquid, of insisting on your right to exist as a fixed point in a chaotic universe. But perhaps the most profound consequence is what happens to your relationship with time itself. Vertical living operates on what the Greeks called chronos, linear, measured, productive time. But horizontal living opens you to kairos, the deeper time of meaning, the eternal now that exists outside of clocks and schedules. Your desire to stay lying down is your soul as hunger for kairos in a world that has overdosed on chronos. You begin to realize that your horizontal position is an escape from reality. It has entrance into a deeper reality. A reality where time moves sideways instead of forward, where being matters more than doing, where you exist as more than just a human resource, awaiting optimization. The question becomes, how long can you sustain this rebellion? How long before the vertical world forces you upright again? How long before the guilt, the shame, the economic necessity pulls you back into the collective trance? Unless, of course, you discover what those who have truly broken free have always known, that the real rebellion isn't lying down forever. It's learning to stand up on your own terms. Here is the radical shift that changes everything. What if the goal isn't to force yourself vertical again, but to become the architect of your own uprightness? What if the rebellion isn't about choosing horizontal over vertical, but about reclaiming your sovereignty over the choice itself? Jung discovered something revolutionary through his own psychological crisis, what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. For months, he felt pulled toward what seemed like psychological dissolution, a desire to retreat from his professional life into dreams and fantasies. But instead of fighting this pull or surrendering to it completely, he did something unprecedented. He honored it as a necessary journey toward integration. He lay down, metaphorically and literally, until he could stand up as himself rather than as society's version of who he should be. This is the counterintuitive truth that horizontal wisdom teaches. Sometimes you must lie down completely before you can stand up authentically. The rebellion isn't against verticality itself, it's against unconscious verticality, against standing up for reasons you never examined, moving toward destinations you never chose. Consider the historical examples of those who mastered this art of conscious uprightness. Henry David Thoreau retreated to Walden Pond, not to escape society permanently, but to discover what kind of participation in society would be authentic for him. His horizontal period, 2 years of deliberate withdrawal, allowed him to stand up as a conscious objector to unconscious living. He wrote, A mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Your bed-bound rebellion is your refusal to join that desperate mass. The Buddha spent years in extreme asceticism, then years in luxury, before discovering the middle way. But notice, he had to experience the extremes first. Your extreme horizontality is the solution. It is the necessary pendulum swing that will eventually find its authentic center. You can't choose the middle until you've experienced both sides. Virginia Woolf understood this rhythm of horizontal restoration and vertical creation. She would retreat to her bed for days, even weeks, not from weakness, but from a deep understanding that horizontal time was essential for vertical genius. She called these periods cotton wool, experiences times when the ordinary world became muffled and distant, allowing deeper realities to emerge. Your desire to stay lying down might be your cotton wool calling, your genius demanding the conditions it needs to emerge. But here's where the rebellion becomes practical. The first step isn't to abandon your bed, but to transform your relationship with it. Instead of lying down in defeat, you begin lying down in defiance. Instead of horizontal shame, you cultivate horizontal pride. You recognize that your bed has become a laboratory for consciousness, a resistance cell in the war against unconscious living. You begin what Jung called active imagination, deliberately engaging with the images, thoughts, and feelings that arise during horizontal time. Instead of seeing these as symptoms of depression or laziness, you treat them as messages from your unconscious, guidance from the parts of yourself that have been silenced by vertical demands. You start a dialogue with your horizontal self, asking, "What are you trying to tell me? What have I been too busy to hear?" The rebellion deepens when you realize that every moment you spend lying down consciously is a moment stolen back from the attention merchants, the productivity pimps, the meaning thieves who profit from your vertical compliance. Your horizontal time becomes sacred time, protected time, revolutionary time. You begin to jealously guard these moments, like the precious resource they are. Then comes the crucial shift. You begin to apply horizontal consciousness to vertical living. When you do stand up, and eventually you carry the wisdom of lying down with you. You move more slowly. You choose more carefully. You participate more selectively. You work from choice rather than compulsion, from authentic desire rather than social programming. This is what the Taoists understood with their concept of wu-wei action that arises from stillness, movement that emerges from rest. Your horizontal periods aren't delays before real living begins. They're the source from which authentic living springs. You begin to see that the most powerful action comes not from forced effort, but from aligned intention. The rebellion becomes complete when you realize that you've been asking the wrong question. Instead of, "How do I stop wanting to lie down?" you begin asking, "How do I honor what my horizontal wisdom is teaching me?" Instead of, "When will I feel motivated again?" you ask, "What would motivation look like if it arose from my authentic center rather than external pressure?" You discover what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. Your horizontal rebellion has been the beginning of this process, the necessary dissolution that precedes authentic integration. And then, something remarkable happens. You begin to stand up not because you have to, but because you want to. Not because the world demands it, but because your authentic self chooses it. Your verticality becomes voluntary rather than compulsory, conscious rather than automatic, meaningful rather than habitual. The rebellion succeeds not when you conquer your desire to lie down, but when you integrate it into a life that honors both horizontal wisdom and vertical expression. You become someone who can lie down without guilt and stand up without betraying yourself. But this integration reveals the final truth, the most radical realization of all. The ultimate truth will shatter everything you thought you knew about living, about meaning, about the very nature of human existence. It's this: your desire to stay lying down was never about lying down at all. It was about dying not physically, but psychologically. It was about the death of who you thought you were supposed to be, so that who you actually are could finally be born. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth, and he recognized it as the most crucial transformation a human being can undergo. Your bed became a tomb. Yes, but tombs aren't just about endings. They're about the sacred space between one life and another, between one identity and its successor. Every moment you've spent lying there, you've been in chrysalis, dissolving the old form so that something unprecedented can emerge. This is why it felt so right and so wrong simultaneously. Every cell in your body recognized the necessity of this death, while every conditioned thought screamed that you were failing, falling, fading away. But you weren't disappearing, you were shedding. Like a snake that must shed its skin or die, like a butterfly that must dissolve completely in the cocoon before wings can form. You were undergoing the most natural and necessary process in psychological development. The radical truth is that your horizontal time has been anything but passive. While you thought you were doing nothing, you were actually engaged in the most active process possible, the active deconstruction of a false self. Every day you refused to stand up unconsciously, you were tearing down another piece of the prison you'd built around your authentic nature. Every hour you spent in what felt like emptiness, you were actually creating space for something real to inhabit. Jung discovered that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own purposes that often run counter to conscious will and social expectations. Your desire to lie down was your psyche's way of saying, "Stop. Everything you think you know about how to live is wrong. We need to start over." And starting over requires a kind of death, a return to the horizontal position of birth, of possibility, of beginnings. But here is the transformation that changes your relationship to everything. You begin to understand that this death-rebirth cycle isn't a one-time event. It's the fundamental rhythm of authentic living. The horizontal and vertical aren't opposing forces, they're breathing. In and out, death and birth, dissolution and integration, rest and action, lying down and standing up, but now both happening in service of something deeper than social compliance or personal ambition. You realize that everyone around you, rushing through their vertical lives, is actually unconsciously seeking the same thing you found in your bed: permission to die to who they re not and be born as who they are. But they're seeking it in external achievements, in relationships, in substances, in experiences anywhere but in the sacred emptiness of horizontal time. They're trying to be born without dying, to transform without dissolving, to become authentic without letting go of who they think they should be. This recognition brings profound compassion. You see that the world's obsession with vertical living isn't evil, it's terror. Terror of the horizontal death that authentic living requires. Terror of the empty space between identities. Terror of lying down long enough to hear what the silence has to teach. The collective insistence on constant motion, constant productivity, constant verticality is humanity's attempt to avoid the psychological death that is the price of psychological birth. But you've paid that price. You've died to the version of yourself that needed to prove its worth through constant motion. You've been reborn as someone who can lie down without shame and stand up without betraying their essence. You've discovered what mystics throughout history have called dying before death, the voluntary dissolution of the ego, so that the authentic self can emerge. And now you understand why this process felt so isolated, so misunderstood, so counter to everything you'd been taught. Real transformation always happens in solitude, in darkness, in the horizontal places where social approval cannot reach. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly in a committee meeting. The seed doesn't become a tree in a performance review. Authentic birth requires the privacy of your own psychological womb, which for you has been your bed. The final realization is both liberating and terrifying. You are no longer the person who first lay down in that bed. That person died somewhere in the process, dissolved in the horizontal darkness. Who you are now, emerging from your psychological cocoon, is unprecedented. You have no blueprint for being this person, no social script for living this life, no external validation for choices that arise from your authentic center rather than collective programming. You are, in the truest sense, born again, not into a religion or ideology, but into your own unrepeatable existence. And like all newborns, you must learn to walk again, to see again, to choose again, but this time from the inside out rather than the outside in. This is why your bed called to you so insistently. It knew what you were not yet ready to know, that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is lie down and die to everything you think you are, so that everything you actually are can finally stand up and live. Welcome to your second life. It begins now.